Good morning and peace be to you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Thank for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving us this opportunity in this morning to have with us two panelists who will be talking on the minorities in the Xinjiang, China area, the Uyghurs. They are going to share the experience and perhaps that from their sharing of information and experience, we, the viewers and participants of this forum, will have some sort of an idea how to treat, how to tackle this problem as a Malaysian, as a lecturer, an academic in International Islamic University, Malaysia, of which one of our missions is to spread peace, to spread mercy to all people, to the societies around us. First and foremost, let me greet our Honorable Rector, Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Dato' Zulkifli Abdul Razak, and the Director of International Institute for Muslim Unity at our university, Professor Dr. Daud Hidabi, and Associate Professor Dr. Fatmir Shehu, and the rest of the members of the organizing committee for preparing for us to participate in this morning's program. And also, of course, to two of our guest speakers, our panelists this morning. The first one is Assistant Professor Dr. Olsi Yezenji. He is a lecturer of International Islamic University and alumnus of the university itself. And second one is Dr. Elise Anderson. She is a Senior Program Officer for Research and Advocacy, Uyghur Human Rights Project. Before we move further into the program, I'm going to play a recorded opening remark speech by our rector, Tan Sri Professor Dr. Zulkifli Abdul Razak.
Professor Ahmed, I think we cannot hear the voice of the rector.
That we see today that affects all of us. No human beings are not affected by this pandemic, and yet within this pandemic, the issue of minorities, the issue of inequity is largely a problem that all of us share. despite human beings are threatened as an entity, we still find there are disparities, we still find there are injustices and also unfairness in trying to create a peaceful and a harmonious human being and a human civilization. Now, recently, I think this statement is enhanced by the World Health Organization when the head of this organization, Dr. Tedros, mentioned about vaccine inequity, and I would like to quote what he said. He said, vaccine inequity is a killer of people and jobs, and it undermines a global economic recovery. And he also further said in an earlier speech that it had created a perfect breeding ground for the emergence of various variants. Now, this is a statement for most of us would mean just a medical sort of metaphor, but for me, I think it has a broader implication. Implication is inequity in whatever form, be it vaccine, be it economy, and be it political, will create a problem for a certain group of people that is not being part and parcel of the issues that they are supposed to be also involved in. Now, on that note, I think I want to also underline this whole idea of inequity, which is now affecting many people around the world. By definitions, I think when we talk about equity, World Health Organization described it as a systematic differences in the health status of different population groups. That is, certain groups experience a far worse health status and an increasingly difficulty in accessing healthcare as a result of the ecosystem that influences it. In other words, some of them who are born in a system that is inequitable, that is unfair, or that is also experiencing what we call historical injustice, will continue to face this health inequity that we talked about. We can easily change the word health to political, to economic, to social, and I think we'll get the same impact, maybe in a different sector, maybe in a different way, but still there is this discrimination, there is this unfairness, there is this injustice that's happening around the world. And therefore, when we talk about minorities as such, these are the circumstances that we need to be aware of, because inequity is in itself avoidable. Although you are born into a place which is not fairly or equitable in a sense, but it is avoidable in the sense that you can make whatever is inequitable to be more equitable in this particular sense. And therefore, I hope this seminar or this colloquium or discussion that we're going to have today will look at this as a positive way to find solutions that could be one of the mechanisms that can reduce inequity or inequitability in this particular sense. I think this seminar should be looked upon as something which is positive, something that will help humankind to be leveled as fellow human beings, same rights with one another, regardless of where, who, and what you are all about. And I think this, I hope the mission of this particular meeting today, so that we can come to a kind of a consensus or an agreement of what do we need to do next as far as looking at minorities is concerned. And therefore, in dealing with issues of inequity, I think we need to take a larger picture that goes beyond just a region, that just go beyond just a culture or just a particular group of people, but to look at it from a civilizational point of view. I think the world has gone into a turmoil that the word civilization now also is not very much meaningful to us anymore because we are so splintered, we are so segmented, and we do not connect with one another as far as civilization is concerned. It is up for us now in the context of creating unity, be it Muslim unity or the world unity. We need to come back to the kind of civilization that we need to create so that everybody can have a fair share of what it is belonging to them as far as human life and civilization is concerned. So on that note, I would want to wish you well. I hope this discussion will be a meaningful one, especially when we can listen to the people who are experiencing the kind of inequity that we talked about, the kind of issue that we are facing, so that we can come to an understanding of how best to move forward. IIUM, being a university that has got an interest in human being, our mission is about the upliftment of human quality of life and civilization. In meeting that mission, we will want to be positive and we want to be active in trying to propose solutions to the world at large so that we can work our way through in bringing human life into a better standards that we have found it, particularly in the lessons that we learned from the pandemic. The pandemic has given us a number of lessons that we need to learn, especially when we talk about vaccinations and the use of vaccines around the world. Despite human being threatened, we find that vaccines has not been used as a tool or as a treatment that treats people equitably. I don't have to enlarge on this. I think there are enough evidences that there is a lot of inequitable or inequity being associated with the use of vaccines and vaccination, that the larger part of the world are still suffering from this issue of the pandemic. And hence the word inequity, as far as vaccine is concerned, is real, as much as it's real in the context of the politics, the economics, or the social implication that is attached to it. So let us understand this very well, and let's look at this as a positive note moving forward. And the university is very delighted to host this conference and to host many other conferences that talks about minority as far as human being is concerned in the way to create a better and a more peaceful world moving forward. So on that note, I wish you well. Wabillahi taufiq wa hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.
Welcome back again. Allow me to again wish all of you who are following us on a YouTube channel a very good morning. And this is going to be a forum on the Muslim Uyghur in China, of which we will be listening to two of our panelists. The first one is Dr. Olsi, and he is a lecturer of International Islamic University. And the second one, I'll be listening to Dr. Elise afterwards. I'll be introducing you to her with all the details afterwards. The first one, let me just introduce Dr. Olsi. Dr. Olsi, who is a lecturer of history and Department of History at our university. He is an alumnus of IIUM itself. He obtained his bachelor degree from the Department of Mass Communication. And then he went for his Master of Human Science from the Department of History and Civilization, and earned his postdoctoral fellow from York University, Toronto, Canada. In 2011, he earned his Doctor of History and Civilization from History, European University Institute, Florence, Italy. He has been very active and has been involved directly with the situation of the Uyghurs in China, and has visited the Xinjiang region Also, he has been invited to give series of talks about Muslims in China on CNN, Al Jazeera, Radio Free Asia, etc. And he has also published papers about the situation in Uyghur China. Without further ado, let us listen to Dr. Olsi, who will be sharing with us his experience through his visitations and engagements with the Uyghur in China. The floor is yours, Doctor.
Thank you very much, Professor Akmal, and for the introduction. Yes, as you rightly mentioned, I've in the recent years involved somehow with the Uyghur issue and the developments in Xinjiang, because as we all know and understand, I mean, the Uyghur issue is a hot issue nowadays. It is an issue where we have diplomatic incidents, where we have big governments who fight over what is going on in Xinjiang. So because we have all this international, how can I say, diplomatic fights sometimes, I wanted to know really what is going on. So can you see this article that I'm sharing? Xinjiang is a good place. Yeah. So this is one article which was published in the last few days from one of the major newspapers in China of the Communist Party, and this other article from Global Times, where the Chinese government criticized the American government, and it says it shouldn't turn a blind eye to Xinjiang. So we have these great diplomatic skirmishes that are going on, and we have different governments who try to present their own point of view. So with this thing in mind, I wanted to really understand what is really going on in Xinjiang. Before dealing with the Uyghur issue, I have dealt with the issue of the radicalization of Muslims in Europe. We had a phenomena in Europe from 2011 to 2014. We had many young Muslims who were in a way radicalized by sometimes fake propaganda, and they were sent to commit terrorist acts in Syria. So with this thing in mind, my initial suspicion was that probably the so-called Uyghur issue was a fake issue being in a way promoted by certain governments who want to harm China. And as a journalist and academician that I am, I wanted to check myself what is going on. This latest article, which is, I think, from yesterday, it shows still the conflict that the Uyghur issue makes when it comes to the foreign relations of China, not only of the United States, but here we have China that has problems even with Turkey and other Muslim countries who sometimes raise the Uyghur issue. So in order to really understand what is going on in Xinjiang, I had approached the Chinese embassy in Tirana, Albania, 2019, before joining the International Islamic University. In the time I was teaching in Albania. And I wanted to become part of a group of a delegation where the Chinese government invite different academicians and journalists, where they try to show their own side of the reality in Xinjiang. So I joined a group of journalists who were coming from countries from Eastern Europe and from Asia and the Middle East, in order to find out and understand myself what is going on in Xinjiang. So I was invited by the information office of the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, and I visited Xinjiang from 16th to 25th of August of 2019. Now, the thing is this, China is in a diplomatic offensive over the realities in Xinjiang. And here we have a number of issues. The issue number one is that China is developing the Uyghur Autonomous Region of Xinjiang. It is investing heavily, and it is or has become one of the major, how can I put it, places from where China intends to export its One Road and One Belt initiative. But on the other hand, the realities in Xinjiang is that this is a region historically inhabited by Muslims. Xinjiang, otherwise known by the local Uyghurs as Dogu Turkestan or East Turkestan, has not always been part of China. It has been colonized by China, invaded by China, and since the creation of China's People's Republic, it has been incorporated into the People's Republic of China. Now, the history of Xinjiang is not very different from other Muslim majority republics that we had in Soviet Union. As a teacher of Russian history, I'm very much aware of the fate of Muslims in Central Asia, or what we in Russian history call as Evrazia. We have the Soviets after the Bolshevik Revolution, who with Stalin implemented a number of policies in order to create nations within the Soviet space, but also to destroy Islam. What happened in Soviet Union, especially during the time of Stalin, in a way happened even in Xinjiang. However, we had major developments in Xinjiang, especially after the so-called 2009 Urumqi riots, because of Han Chinese colonial settlement in this region. There was a big conflict between native Turkic Muslims and the Han settlers. With this thing in mind, I visited Xinjiang in order to understand myself what is going on. And during my visit, apart from seeing the massive investment and development that China is doing in this region, we saw with our own eyes, and we witnessed that the region is being kept in a military lockdown. We visited the cities of Aksu, of Kashgar, of Urumqi, and everywhere where you go, you see a huge military and police presence, and you see that the region is run and commanded by Han Chinese who come from other regions of China, while the Uyghurs are treated in a way as Palestinians are treated in the West Bank. Now, during our visit, the information office of the Communist Party of Xinjiang, they wanted to, in a way, convince us as foreign experts and journalists that we are, that things are fine in Xinjiang. They delivered to us a number of lectures. They gave us to read a number of government white papers, but in these lectures and the white papers that we were served to by experts who nowadays are even the head of the province, like Mr. Xu Guingjiang, we read an open Islamophobia and contempt for Islam. The Chinese government in these white papers shows Islam as a barbaric religion, as a religion that was imposed on Uyghurs by the Turks and less civilized Arabs. And the spirit of these white papers was the spirit of Reconquista, or for people who are experts on the ideology of Hindutva in India, where Hindu fundamentalists try to convert Muslims back into Hinduism. Even here, we saw the same thing. Our Chinese officials, they sent us to visit a number of museums in Kashgar, in Urumqi, and in Aksu. And in all these state museums, Islam was depicted as a foreign religion, as a religion which was spread by violence. And the Uyghurs were depicted as latecomers in Xinjiang, when we, as historians of Turkic and Russian civilization, we know that the heart of the Turkic people are the Altai Mountains, which are in Xinjiang, but the Chinese historiography was trying to change the history and the perception that it wanted to give to the world. So they were trying to tell us, the foreign experts and journalists, that Uyghurs came from Central Asia, they were not Muslims, they were wrongfully Islamized, and the ideology that we were getting was similar to the ideology that we saw in the Balkans during the wars of Yugoslavia, where Serbian Orientalists were attacking Albanian Kosovar Muslims and the Bosnians through the same kind of fake Orientalist narratives. So if in Bosnia or in Kosovo, the Muslims were being shown as invaders who came with the Turks, or people who betrayed Orthodox Christianity and who have to get back to the Serbian and Orthodox culture. In Xinjiang, we had the same story. Muslims were shown as foreigners, and Islam as a religion that doesn't belong to the region. Something else that drew our attention was a massive process of cultural de-Islamization that was happening in the province. In cities like Kashgar, but Aksu and others, the Chinese government was bulldozing not only mosques, but even old fortresses which belonged to the Turkic Islamic civilization of this region. They were in a great offensive of name changes, like in India, where we have Hindu fundamentalists who are lately changing the name of Allahabad and putting a Hindu name. You had the same phenomena, even in Xinjiang. Cities like, for example, Kashgar were being called into Kashi. And moreover, in the state museums, there was a very racist depiction of the Uyghurs. So the Uyghurs were being shown as primitive people, as people who didn't know how to use toilets and who didn't have toilets. And on the other hand, the Communist Party of China and the colonizing Han Chinese were being depicted as people who were bringing cars, civilization, modern buildings, and were teaching these people how to be civilized. Until this point, for guests like me and others, we were willing to remain silent about what we were seeing. But during our visit, our Chinese friends sent us to visit a number of what we in the West call concentration camps, but what the Chinese were called, them were so-called vocational training centers. And in these vocational training centers that the Chinese government has built, we saw Muslim boys and girls, people who were in their 20s or 30s, who had been arrested, detained for more than 1 or 2, some even 5 years. And their crime, what was because they were Muslim. Here is one example, the video that is in front of you, the case of Sumaya. She has a Muslim name. And in 2019, when I visited her, she was in this prison for more than 1 year. And her crime was because she was praying to Allah and she was wearing hijab like students in our international Islamic university. I'm going to play this video and later I'm going to comment what is really going on. So you can listen her story and how she says that she is in this center because she had to wear hijab and religious dressing is prohibited in Xinjiang. And if 1 year before she was a practicing Muslim, a thing which, according to the police, classified her to be an extremist, now, after 1 year of imprisonment and forceful re-education, she has renounced Islam and she is not Muslim anymore. Now, what is going on with Sumaya is going on a massive scale in Xinjiang. So the Chinese authorities, at least when I was there in 2019, I don't know what is the situation now, were hunting down every young Muslim who had a beard, who was probably saying Salam Alaikum, who was reading Quran, because mind you, reading the Quran without a license or praying to Allah without a license from government is considered a crime in Xinjiang. There are people that I interviewed who were arrested because they had told to their fathers that they were Muslim. In Xinjiang, there is a set of law called the Extremification Regulation, where every Islamic practice is considered to be a crime. So in Xinjiang, the same thing is not true about other parts of China. In Beijing, you can practice Islam, no problem. But in Xinjiang, because the Chinese government is in the midst of a war for crashing down the Uyghur identity, if you have any practice of Islam, like let us say, if your father dies and you want to pray his janazah, if you marry and you want to make a nikah, if you want to circumcise your child, or any other religious act that you do, this is immediately considered to be a crime. You are an extremist, you are arrested, separated from your family, and sent into these so-called de-radicalization centers. So if in Xinjiang you do what we do here in Malaysia, send our children who are under 18 in Islamic schools to learn Quran, you are immediately considered an extremist. Your child will be taken from you. You will be sent in one of these de-extremification centers, and you will be separated from your wife. You will be prohibited from praying to Allah. You will be forced to eat pork, and you will be released from this center only after you renounce Islam, you learn and speak Mandarin, you praise 3 times a day Xi Jinping, you curse Allah and Islam and you say there is no God, there is no Allah, and you forget being a Muslim. And if your name was, let us say, Ahmed or Sumaya, they give you a new Han-Chinese name, and you have to keep this name for the rest of your life. I'm going to play this video for illustration about what is going on. How old are you?
23 years.
Are you married?
结婚了没？没有 haven't yet.
You had hijab before, right?
之前也没有工作，来这儿之前没有工作。No, just a farmer.
No, she had a scarf.
Yes, yes, yes.
She had a scarf before.
以前你要戴那个头巾那些是吧？蒙面。Yes.
Why did you end up here?
Why did she want?
Why she came here? Who brought her here?
Just.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Repeat because I'm already.
Okay. 为什么要来这儿？你再先拿中文说一下。就是download the unlawful videos of extremism from the smartphone and wear the scarf to cover the whole face and body, and also ask the females surrounding her to follow.
So as you can hear from what Sumaya is admitting in front of my phone, is that her crime was wearing hijab, telling to her friends to wear hijab, and reading about Islam on the internet. So these are 3 major crimes in Xinjiang, which you as a Muslim, if you practice, you are immediately classified as an extremist, and the Chinese authorities are going to arrest you and send you in this de-Islamization camp.
follow her to wear the same scarf.
So, did the police bring her here? Who told the police about her? How did she
你
end
是
up?
怎么样来的？是警察让你来的，还是she is willing to come to here. She find she will. 你是不是觉得自己被极端思想影响以后自己报名的？像村委会还是政府？
就是我们村里的跟我说的，我被宗教极端思想感染以后，就是跟我说的这样的一所学校能就是我思想
向你推荐了是吧？
然后我就是跟我家人一起来的。
家人陪你来的，还是你家也有人来？
就是我跟家人一起会来的。
一起来的是吧 ？Actually, sorry. In fact, the police in the village told her she was influenced by the extremism. So there is a training center, a school. Can teach the knowledge. So the police recommends this school for her. So she is willing to come to here, and the families and relatives of her accompany her to come to here.
So the police brought her here, or her family? Who brought her here?
The families.
The family brought her here?
Not put, just accompany her to here.
Since how long are you here? How long are
你
you?
已经来这多长时间了
5年多了。
？More than 1 year.
How much longer you stay here?
你还要待多久 ？According to 你还要待多久？7
现在我学习这些技能嘛，每个月有考核，考核达标后可以。
要考核几次？一般几个月
1个月1次考核。
考核，如果考核过了就可以走是吧？
考核过了可以结业。
考核过了可以结业。Actually, she is learning the last class here, the skills class. When she reaches the standard criteria, she can live here. This kind of test for once a month. So every month there is a test for skills. When she reaches the standard criteria, she can live.
What questions do you have in the test?
What?
Questions they have in the test?
你们那个考试的内容是什么？
就是我现在
标准是什么？
标准就是我现在学70面点嘛，就是我制作的糕点样品是和详见客户一样，就是形状好看，搭配漂亮，就是。
Her skills class is pastry baking, bakes cakes. There are several standards like the shape of the cake is good or the taste is well, and the teacher will judge.
Is it illegal in China to wear a scarf?
在中国戴那个头上的那个是不是合法的？就是你之前戴的那种蒙面的。
就是穿那个面罩，是宗教极端的一种表现。
It's lawful. Just as a scarf for the wind or sand prevention, it's okay. But the religious, like the whole covers the face and the body, is unlawful.
Is not allowed.
Yes, it's not allowed.
So what happens if you wear with long and with a scarf?
如果你穿戴那样蒙面罩袍，会有什么样的结果？会有什么样的事情发生呢？会有人来告诉你，还是直接警察带走，还是怎么样？就是你之前不是穿戴那个罩袍吗？然后那些人是有警察会告诉你不要穿，还是直接把你带走？还是
就是我参加了我们学里举办的那个法制学校活动，然后知道了自己那个行为是违法的，然后就是。
There is a law class that hold in the village committee, and she understands that her behavior is breaking the law. So she, 你知道了是违法的，然后呢？
然后就是我曾经给我提
And later the police of the village told her maybe your behavior is unlawful, so she willing to leave.
So the testimony of Sumaya here in this video shows with her own words and with our Chinese communist officials who are translating for us that it is against the law to wear hijab, it is against the law to pray to Allah, it is against the law to do any practice of Islam. Now, when we visited these concentration centers in Xinjiang, the people that you see here, they are Turkic people. And I know some basic Turkish. And I was also with a Turkish journalist in this visit, and we had journalists from other countries as well. When we visited these prisoners of religion, which China calls them students who are being de-radicalized, we were talking to them in their own language. We saluted them, we told them, Salam alaikum. They were understanding us very well. We told to them, hello, we are journalists, we're from Albania, we are from Turkey. But the students could not respond to us in their Turkic language, because they are even prohibited to speak their own language when they are in these de-Islamization centers. The other prisoner that you see here on the left, he was here for more than 5 years, and one of his crimes was to pray to Allah in public. So while you are not allowed even to pray in the mosque, you must have a license from the Communist Party of China if you want to pray to Allah in Xinjiang. A major crime is if you dare to pray to Allah in public. So what the Chinese authorities are doing is they're taking from the street young Muslims who wear hijab, who pray to Allah, who practice Islam. They remove their Islamic dress. They prohibit them from praying to Allah, because practicing Islam is in Xinjiang considered to be extremism. And they teach them skills. They make them factory workers. They teach them how to bake bread. And they teach them how to sing and dance. So here is another short video where a Turkish journalist who was with me makes in a Kashgar detention center, where he asks the teacher of this center, who are these people? That she says they are extremists. So they are detained, arrested from the street, and sent into these centers.
And students also rehearse Chinese, more popular Chinese song.
希望大家喜欢，也希望给大家带来一份好心情。
Hope you like it.
One question on it. They are here because they are extremist and radical Islamists, these girls, before they come here. These girls are radical Islamists before they come
Which
here.
girl?
All these an extremist.
再来受到了你的思想的影响，他们都是极端主义，有这叫什么极端主义行为的人。
是的，对。
Yes.
So you could hear that the people who are in these centers, they are considered to be radical Islamists, extremists, people who are considered to be a danger for the society. This is what we witnessed in when we were in Xinjiang. This is what we saw. And this is what I presented to the world after coming out of China's Xinjiang. Of course, my findings were not well received by our hosts, but as a historian and academician that I am, I have to present to the world what is going on. So in few words, since it seems I have only 10 more minutes, let me just summarize what is going on with the Muslim majority in Xinjiang, which is considered a minority when we talk about China at large. What is going on in Xinjiang, especially in the last decades, is that the Chinese government is waging a kind of a Cold War against its Muslim minority. Since especially the 2009 so-called Urumqi riots, and because the Chinese government is afraid from the Islamic spirit of the Uyghurs, they are in a massive process of Sinicization and the Islamization of Muslims in Xinjiang. According to the Xinjiang regulation on the extremification, the practice of Islam is totally outlawed. In regulation, chapter 2, article 9, group reading of the Quran, teaching of Islam to children, speaking about Islam, possessing Islamic literature, watching religious shows, or advocating Islam in any sense is considered a crime that is punishable with imprisonment or long and painful re-education in the so-called vocational training centers that the West calls them concentration camps. Apart from mass detaining people and sending people into these centers, China is changing the cultural space of Xinjiang. During the visit, our Chinese hosts showed to us how they're even transforming the nature of those mosques that haven't yet been bulldozed. So the government of China in Xinjiang is destroying the Islamic architecture. They are destroying the domes of the mosques, the minarets, and they are redesigning the mosques to look like Buddhist temples. Because the official ideology of the Chinese government in Xinjiang is that Islam is a foreign religion, and before that we had Buddhism dominant, and culturally these people should slowly but surely revert to the Chinese culture, and in particular to Buddhism. Apart from this, what the government of Beijing is doing since the 1950s, there is a massive colonial settlement in Xinjiang. So if in 1950s, the Han Chinese population was something to 5 to 9%, by 2010, they are around 40% of the population. And as you can imagine, the Chinese colonists who come, they have the best houses, they have good jobs, many of them have government jobs, while Uyghurs are either factory workers or are mainly peasants. Because of this great social injustice that is going on, we had even big riots in 2009. The Uyghurs wanted to have their own share of their country and the economy and over the control of their own resources. But what was the result? The result was a very harsh campaign. And when somebody visits Xinjiang, those days, those who are allowed by China and who are mostly supervised by government minders, you will see that the Uyghurs, but not only, because we have even other Turkic groups who live in Xinjiang. We have Kazakhs, we have Kyrgyz, we have the Tatars and other Turkic people. They live in fear of persecution. Now, when somebody visits big cities like Urumqi, in Urumqi there is a very historical bazaar called the Chong Bazaar. You will see there a very beautiful mosque. So if we compare that, that can be like we have Masjid Jamek here in the center of Kuala Lumpur, but the Chinese government has desecrated the Chong Bazaar Mosque, and they have turned it into a market. So imagine what will happen, let us say, if someone will turn the Masjid Jamek that we have here in the center of Kuala Lumpur into a supermarket. So you have desecration of mosques, and moreover, if you are a religious scholar, an ulama, you will either go to jail or you will go to these mass detention centers, and your chance for living a free life will be only if you renounce Islam and your Muslim identity. Now, what we are seeing nowadays in China We have seen it in the past in Soviet Union. There is a very good book by Shoshana Keller called To Moscow, Not to Mecca, which in a way details the Soviet strategy on destroying Islam and mosques in Soviet Union. We had the same situation in Albania, where I come from, where our communist officials did the same thing. And in 1967, they even totally prohibited religion. Now, what is going on in China and in Xinjiang in particular at present is that the Chinese government, who is very worried by the news that come out of the Muslim world, countries like Qatar, like Malaysia, Indonesia, Turkey, etc., is doing a propaganda offensive. So the Chinese government is trying to convince the Muslim world that things are fine in Xinjiang, that China is developing Xinjiang. Now, if you read carefully the Chinese government official releases, they do show the investment that China is doing in Xinjiang. And it is true. If you see and compare, let us say, Urumqi of today with Urumqi that was like 50 years ago, it is totally different. The Chinese government is investing a lot, but at the same time, it is massively de-Islamizing the native population, and it is forcefully Sinnifying it. So while the Chinese government is right about the investment, the thing that it doesn't show is what it is doing with Islam. And what happens is that when you have many journalists who come from Muslim countries, even diplomats, the Chinese government sends them to nice hotels, sends them to nice factories. But in all the official propaganda that the Chinese government does, you do not see a single lady with hijab. Even in the videos and the documentaries that state televisions do in China, in order to show to the world that things are fine in Xinjiang, you will see people who have been like Sumaya that you saw in the video, who in the past were wearing hijab, were praying to Allah, but who after going into this de-Islamization center, they have been integrated into the atheist society of communist China. So in few words is, China is investing in Xinjiang. It is oppressing and massively assimilating the local Turkic population, and Islam has been declared an extremist religion. But on the other hand, the Chinese government is doing what Stalin did with Muslims during World War II, with the UFA spiritual organization. It is creating communist-friendly Muslims. So they had created in Urumqi, if I'm not wrong, an institute that they call it for Islamic Studies, where they are educating people with loyalty to the Communist Party and the people who will have to produce the Islam that the Chinese government wants. During our lectures and debates that I had with our Chinese friends when I was in Xinjiang, they told us that we want Muslims who drink alcohol, who do not pray 5 times per day, who do not wear hijab. So they are keeping some mosques open in order to show to the outside, and in particular to the Muslim world, that yes, we do have mosques, but these mosques look like Buddhist temples. And in the mosques that we visited, inside mosques, you see big posters of the Communist Party and Xi Jinping. So for people who are expert on history of religion, is the exact desecration that the Greeks did to Jewish temples during the Hellenic invasion of Judea and Samaria, when they put the idols of Zeus inside the Jewish temples where they were worshiping Allah. So, or if we come back to the history of pre-Islamic Jahiliyyah, it is what is happening is that we are having Lati and Uzza being placed inside of the Kaaba. Thank you very much. This is all from me.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Osi, for that very, very informative experience that you have shared with us. And to have another perspective of the issue at hand, we have with us, as I've already introduced to you earlier on, Dr. Elise Anderson, who is a senior program officer at the Uyghur Human Rights Project. She oversees various research and advocacy projects in relation to the Uyghur people, culture, and region. She earned dual PhD degrees in Central Eurasian Studies and Ethnomusicology from Indiana University, Bloomington, USA in 2019, following years of conducting ethnographic and archival research in the Uyghur region. And one interesting fact about Dr. Elise is that she is fluent in Uyghur language itself and also proficient in Mandarin. So without further ado, Dr. Elise, enlighten us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for organizing this event and having me here among the participants today. All right, so let me get my screen share up. I'll need just one moment. Sorry for that. Okay, here we go. Right, so I have titled my talk today, as you can see, the Uyghur Genocide, examining the evidence, taking action. You just heard a really excellent, engaging, very empirically rich presentation from Dr. Olsey. And I'm going to, hopefully do an engaging and empirically rich presentation, but of a slightly different kind, presenting other kinds of evidence. So these are not culled necessarily from my own ethnographic research when I lived in the region from 2012 to 2016, but from the kinds of work I've been engaged in with the Uyghur Human Rights Project over the last few years. So to jump right in. I won't spend a lot of time talking about this, but I always think it's really important to note to audiences, who the Uyghurs are. And I think what I have to say builds really nicely on what you just heard from Dr. Olsey. Uyghurs are a Central Asian people who have been and are still currently being colonized. Uyghurs are a Turkic and majority Muslim people who live in East Turkestan, or what sometimes people call the Uyghur region, AKA the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. Many Uyghurs actually see Xinjiang as a very offensive term because it is the colonial name for this region, assigned by an outside power. Uyghurs are Central Asian, broadly speaking, right? In terms of cultural affinities and linguistic affinities, they're not Chinese, and they have very distinct lifeways that are now being erased. Many Uyghurs also really resent and oppose actively being called an ethnic minority or a minority group, right? With the logic for that, if you might try to put yourself in a Uyghur's place, being that, some people have come in and colonized our land and they're trying to make us into a minority, but then minimizing, right, our culture, our lifeways through doing that. Just a little bit of important background there. I also wanted to share, before I jump into the evidence I'm gonna look at today, just a little bit about the organization where I currently work. So as you heard, I got my doctorate. I did not go into academia, and now I'm working on research-based advocacy, specifically in promotion of Uyghurs, political, social, economic, cultural, and human rights at this organization that is based in Washington, DC. So what do we do? In my daily life now, I'm doing research-based advocacy, and the audiences we have for that research-based advocacy are governments, multilateral institutions, civil society groups. We also do some work to rescue Uyghurs who are at risk of deportation back to China. And we believe at UHRP, and I believe personally very much, that Uyghurs, like other humans, deserve fundamental rights so that they can live with freedom, dignity, and respect. And our organization is calling on China to end the Uyghur genocide. We can talk more probably in the Q&A about genocide determinations, what genocide even means, if you're interested in that. So let's get into this evidence that I've been talking about presenting to you. What is the nature of the crisis? It is a multifaceted campaign to destroy the Uyghurs. That is what the abundant evidence points to. Now, representatives of the Chinese party state apparatus, speaking through media, speaking through other forums, will say that, this is fabricated, people are making this up. There's no evidence for the things that these, people around the world from the outside are saying are happening, but indeed there is a lot of evidence. And probably the most sort of familiar number to many of us is this figure of 1.8 million, an estimated 1.8 million minimum Uyghur adults who were locked up in concentration camps since 2017. Now this, at this point, is an old number. This research done by Adrian Zenz is several years old, but the real number, as I've noted here, is a mystery because the Chinese government, the party state, refuses to reveal what that number of Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and other Turkic Muslim adults being held in concentration camps actually is. More recently, there was an investigation published in BuzzFeed News last year in 2021 that showed that the concentration camp network can actually hold at least 1.01 million people at once. But that's the detention, that includes, prisons, concentration camps, detention centers of various types, right? So the idea here is like the scale is huge. The scope, the number of people who can be filtered in and out and back into this system is really massive, and maybe more than we can even really imagine. So another important figure, another important bit of evidence, research by the Australian Strategic and Policy Institute. Oh, no, I'm sorry. This is research that was published in the New York Times, showed that the Uyghur region accounted for less than 2% of China's population, but roughly 17% of arrests in 2017 alone. So tiny population, nearly a fifth of all the arrests that happen across the People's Republic of China. And so this is a real crisis of mass incarceration that is kind of distinct from, but happens parallel to, internment in concentration camps. So the Chinese government has really ramped this up in the past few years. They're trying Uyghurs on trumped up charges in often secret trials, and then sentencing them to prison for 15, 20 years, even life in a number of instances that we've been able to find. Another figure, another piece of evidence. This is the research from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, who found in a report published in 2021, I want to say, that approximately 16,000 Uyghur mosques were significantly destroyed or damaged by the Chinese government between 2017 and 2020. And these mosques account for 65% of all the mosques in the region. And as you just heard a really excellent presentation about, the Communist Party, the party state apparatus really is criminalizing faith, criminalizing religious practice, and destroying Uyghur religious and other forms of heritage. Forced labor, as you might have heard, is also a really significant component of this multifaceted assault on Uyghurs. So there's an estimated minimum hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs in forced labor schemes. There are millions, over 1 million, who are at risk, according to the work of some researchers. The Uyghurs are forced to work in factories across China, but in East Turkestan, but then all over China as well, where they're basically modern day slaves. They're making textiles, computers, solar panels, and other products, tomato products, and probably many more products than we're even aware of, that then are making their way around the globe and ending up in our own households. A number of Uyghur children have also been orphaned, left without their parents, who have been taken away, and they have been placed in care of the state. So research published last year by Amnesty International estimated, on the basis of a variety of government documents, that more than 800,000, really close to 900,000 Uyghur children were likely forcibly placed in various kinds of government institutions from 2017 to 2019. So we're talking about orphanages, boarding schools, whatever kinds of facilities they are. Essentially, they are places where Uyghur children are separated from their families, from their native language, from their culture, from the very community that they were born into. Forced sterilizations and forced abortions have been happening throughout the PRC for a long time, in East Turkestan for a long time, but have taken pretty significantly sharp turns in this region in recent years. So research by Adrian Zenz showed that there was a 49% drop in the birth rate from 2017 to 2019 in this region, which is not a natural change in a birth rate anywhere, ever, I think, in human history. Similarly, that research estimates, an upper estimate of 4.5 million fewer Uyghur births by 2041 than would have taken place if this sort of intervention into Uyghur births was not happening on the part of the government. So, this might be, as this research showed, up to 1/3 of the projected population. And it was details like this that led the Uyghur Tribunal, an independent tribunal in London, which issued a judgment last December that the Chinese government is committing genocide and crimes against humanity against Uyghurs. This is what led the tribunal to make that judgment. It was this element of birth prevention that really looked like genocidal intent to that tribunal. Another element of what has been happening, right? And the point I'm making here, I'll just go ahead and say it. The point I'm making is that this crisis goes, it was the camps, the concentration camps that caught the world's attention. But this crisis goes so much deeper than that and so far beyond that. So in addition to the camps and the other heartbreaking things I'm telling you about, Uyghur homes have essentially been invaded over the past several years. So there was a home stay and home visit program called, quote, Becoming Family, that was rolled out in 2017, although it's kind of related to some older programs. And starting in 2017, approximately 1 million Han cadres who call themselves family members were dispatched into Uyghur homes, where they basically were like spies, who would go to stay in the home and talk to the family there and gather intel, essentially, on what was happening in the family. And these are things that are very well documented on social media. So cadres themselves would post all sorts of evidence, like this photo you can see as the backdrop on this slide. It came from a social media post that a participant family member in this program actually posted to social media themselves. So if we go back a little bit, right, this crisis, the concentration camp system and the mass internment campaign really took off in earnest and began in earnest in 2017, in the spring of that year. But in the years leading up to that, including the years that I was living in the Uyghur region, there were a lot of sort of early versions of policies, that were being rolled out and that the government was pursuing. And just from 2016 to 2017 alone, the government of the autonomous region increased its security spending by 92.8%. So these are kind of staggering numbers, and you can see in the lower left-hand corner, from 5.4 billion renminbi in 2007 to 59.75 billion renminbi in 2017. What's one of the things they were also doing at the same time? Building a massive amount of police stations, like this structure you can see in the image I have on this slide, a so-called People's Convenient police station, right? So they built approximately 7,700 of these in 1 year alone, a grid of these that then were complemented by a really comprehensive surveillance system that bolstered this whole thing, right? So that is all intended at giving you, a sense of the scale and the scope and the comprehensiveness of what's going on. Now, at my organization, I've already told you we do research-based advocacy as well, and this slide I'm showing you here includes the covers from reports we have published in the last year alone. So we're regularly looking for evidence to document rights violations, the nature of these atrocity crimes. And in addition to this evidence that I've just shared with you, we have also found a number of other things. So a few more things that I think might be of interest to those of you in the audience today. I want to say earlier this year, it was actually in 2021, we published a report called Islam Dispossessed that presented the results of a database we compiled along with Uyghur researchers with 1,046 cases, which we think is just an estimate and a very minimum number. But we found 1,046 Turkic imams, so Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz people, and so on, who have been detained, interned in concentration camps, or even put into prison between 2014 and 2021, right? So more than 1,000 religious leaders. And we think the evidence suggests that religious leaders were an early and very special target of the government's repression of Uyghurs, of the party state repression. Another report of ours that you might be interested in came out last month in December 2021. We compiled 312 cases, which we think are just a minimum number and an estimate. But we found 312 cases of Turkic intellectual and cultural elites who have been detained or imprisoned, or who are currently being detained or still in prison as of that date of publication in December 2021. So we're talking university professors, university presidents, researchers at government institutions, teachers, and so on. These are members of, the intellectual, cultural, and in some cases, business elite as well. And we suspect this might be an attempt at a form of eliticide that essentially eradicates, right, the cultural leaders and cultural producers of a group of people like the Uyghurs. We have also been researching transnational repression in tandem with an organization called the Oxus Society for Central Asian Affairs. And we published a series of reports on China's transnational repression of Uyghurs. In the first report, which I believe came out in June of 2021, we published that we had found an estimated minimum 1,546 cases of stage 2 and stage 3 transnational repression of Uyghurs from 1997 to 2021. So what does that mean? 1,546 cases in which Uyghurs were detained, imprisoned, or even extradited back to China from third countries, right? From other places in the world where they were living. And the party state has put a massive investment of time, money, and other resources into essentially hunting Uyghurs down, threatening them, and even in some cases, sending them back to China from all around the world. And that continues today in many, many places around the world, such that many Uyghurs live in fear. So this is a lot of probably depressing evidence and kind of heavy information to take in, and sometimes numbers that almost feel unbelievable. And some of you sitting in the audience might be wondering, okay, so like, is anybody really doing anything to address the crisis? What is being done right now? Sometimes people get the impression that like, oh, it's just the US government who's doing things or this or that. But there's actually a lively international response that has really taken off over the last few years. And so I just want to highlight the international response in a few countries that might be of interest to you. So starting with Malaysia. So there has been some limited Malaysian government action, which we were very excited to see. In September 2020, the Malaysian government confirmed that it will not extradite Uyghurs to China. There are also civil society campaigns that you might know about or might not know about that are going on in Malaysia right now. So they include a campaign to save the mosques, which is being led by MAPM, and a campaign to support Uyghur refugees, which is being led by an organization called M4U, which I'll tell you about on the next slide. So M4U is Malaysia for Uyghur, a coalition of, I believe, if the number is correct, somebody will probably correct me if I'm wrong, 24 groups advocating for Uyghur rights. And so some of those groups, right, just a few of them include Aksin, Abim, Mapim, Bada, IIS, Ikram, GPN. And they've been doing a lot of really great and steady work. Some of the origins of M4U, of Malaysia for Uyghur, come from some of the group members having traveled to East Turkestan, to the Uyghur region, and seeing camps like Dr. Olsi and realizing, wait, what the Chinese government is saying is not true about these. These are concentration camps. And then they came back to Malaysia and decided to take action. There's also a new book you might be interested in called The Plight of the Muslim Uyghurs from December 2021, which was published by Dr. Azmi, the president of Mapim. Right, and so there's a photograph of that I've included here. Might be something of interest for audience members to look into and consider purchasing and reading. Over in neighboring Indonesia, there's been a little bit of action, which is really encouraging on the civil society level as well. So one thing that some people might be interested in is, if you can read Bahasa Indonesia, checking out the Instagram account called Indonesia Save Uyghur, run by a group called Freedom Ummah. They have been doing a lot of excellent graphics, informational things on social media, and they even participated in a global day of action on the Olympics, the upcoming Winter Olympics, on January 3rd, which then in turn was covered by, I think, nearly 20 different media outlets in Indonesia. And it was really very encouraging for Uyghur advocates around the world to see. There's a book that was published in Indonesia as well called Journey to Xinjiang by Umar Khaz. It was based on one of these trips to the region, where the author realized that the Chinese state media statements about what was happening were a false front. And then this image I'm showing you here on the left side of the screen is of a speaker who is going around Indonesia speaking in community centers and mosques, Mr. Ahmad Shawki, and educating people on the plight of the Uyghurs and what is happening, right? So these are ways on the civil society level that Indonesians are also addressing the crisis. In addition, there has been government condemnation in Turkey. In February 2019, the government condemned the treatment of Uyghurs as, quote, a great cause of shame for humanity. And they asked China to close what they called openly concentration camps. There have also been some new reports published by organizations in Turkey. So the Uyghur Research Institute in Ankara co-published a report with my organization in Turkish and English last year. And then just in December, a major political party in Turkey, the İYİ Party, compiled and published a 102-page report on the situation. There have also been some responses from sort of global Muslim organizations, right? What I've represented here as a global Muslim response. So on December 30th, just a couple of weeks ago, the Global Imams Council issued a statement of support for oppressed Uyghur Muslims and ruled, quote, that participation and attendance in the Beijing 2022 Olympics are prohibited, end quote. If I'm remembering correctly, there are actually 2 Uyghur imams who are on the Global Imams Council, which just might be of interest to some of you. Additionally, in December 2021, more than 90 Muslim organizations in Asia, including more than 20 organizations in Malaysia and Indonesia combined, signed a letter to the OIC in advance of the December 19th foreign ministers meeting of the OIC. So this is just a screenshot of that letter over here, but this is something you could Google and go look up if you're interested in the substance of it. There's also been a lot of action on forced labor globally through a global coalition to end Uyghur forced labor, essentially asking brands to do the right thing So far, 9 Malaysian groups have endorsed the call to action that this coalition has put out. And your group, if you're sitting here as a representative of some group, you might consider doing that as well and joining more than 400 groups from 40 countries around the world in endorsing this coalition. And I just want to end today, so I kind of started to get into it a little bit, right? By sharing the international response with you, I'm getting to the place of saying, okay, now what can you do? And what can Malaysians more broadly do? And what can we as humans do in order to become part of the solution for the Uyghur crisis? So I have just a few really simple ideas to share with you right now. One of those is post about Uyghurs on social media. There are still a lot of people in the world who don't even know who Uyghurs are, let alone what they're facing. So you can educate your friends and family by doing something as simple as posting, and you can ask them to join the cause. You could also consider joining a coalition like Malaysia for Uyghurs. So consider joining in the work of them for you, or the work of other groups who are already fighting the fight to protect Uyghurs' rights and end this genocide. And another thing you can do is consider asking your elected officials to take a stand. You could write letters, you can make phone calls, whatever it takes, right, to try to engage elected leaders, MPs, and so forth. Try doing that and asking them to take action. These are all pretty small things that really get onto the personal level, right? Posting, joining a group, talking to elected leaders. But if we all do small actions, right, and take small steps, it doesn't mean that change is inevitable, but it makes it a whole lot harder for powerful people to ignore, right? So I'll wrap up here. And I just wanted to share with you, a few social media accounts that you can follow. If you want to follow the work of UHRP, you can follow us at Twitter at Uyghur Project. You can also follow my personal Twitter at Anderson Elise M. We're also on Facebook and on Instagram as well. And we're just happy to have I am happy to have had this opportunity to speak to you today, and I look forward to hearing your comments and your questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Elise. Now, brothers and sisters, so we are already at the end of the forum, but of course, before that, we are opening the floor to question and answers to our panelists. So I've been asking the Secretariat to cut and paste the questions, if there is any, from our YouTube channel to the chat box here, or otherwise I will just invite and open the floor to anyone who are here with us participating to pose his or her question. So please, if you have any question, or perhaps that it should be initiated by the moderator itself. A very interesting fact to learn about China itself, Dr. Elise and Dr. Olsi, is the way that they are treating, well, especially we as Muslims here in Malaysia, of course, we are very much interested to know from that perspective as a Muslim. Do you have any sort of an explanation? How is it that the Chinese government are treating the Uyghur people differently from the other Muslims outside of Xinjiang? Do you have anything, that you can share with us? Why there is a double standard in treating a certain religious group of people inside China itself? And why is it so? So back to you, if you have anything to share with us, Dr. Elise or Dr. Olsi.
Should Elise, are you going to respond, or should I go, Elise?
I'll respond as well, but you can respond first.
Well, my guess is that the Chinese, they are afraid from the Uyghurs for a number of reasons. Reason number one is because they are in this geopolitical fight for influence with the West and with the Americans in particular. And the Chinese, they do not want Xinjiang to become another Afghanistan or Chechnya for them. So during my visit in East Turkestan, they changed the name, they call it Xinjiang, but Uyghurs refused that. One of the officials with whom I was speaking and who was even representing China to the United Nations on the Human Rights Council, he told me that, they had a problem with these Muslims, the same problem that Russians had with their own Muslim stance during time of Soviet Union. And the official with whom I spoke, he told me we should have done what we're doing now with the Uyghurs in 1980s. So why China has double standards when it comes to, let us say, Han Muslims and the Uyghurs is for many reasons. One is geostrategical. Number two is that the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region is the native land of these Muslims. So they are not Chinese Han Muslims who simply converted to Islam and practice Islam. They are a group with a great history and Turkic Islamic tradition. And the fear that China has is that they do not want Xinjiang to become a Kashmir or a Palestine for them. And then it is the economics, because the trade of China, it's a mega imperialist project, one road and one belt, passes through Xinjiang. And they are very much aware that if a foreign power would like to harm the Chinese social imperialism, the Uyghurs are their weak spot. Now, when I was in Xinjiang, and of course, I have videos with other journalists who were shocked by what we're seeing, but of course, our videos never went into Chinese television, and we were even discredited as liars and every other thing by what we saw that they were doing to people. I advised our Chinese friends, I told them, look, I know that you are concerned about the future of Xinjiang, but you cannot have a Stalinist solution for it. I advise them to follow the example of Putin in Chechnya, where Putin made peace with Islam in Chechnya, with the Kadyrov and others, but not what they are doing. The problem with the Chinese government today is that they think that they are strong and they can behave like Stalin who mass deported the Chechens and Tatars into Siberia, and who closed the mosques and executed the mullahs. They think they can do that. But the other problem is that the Chinese are very much afraid from the Muslim world. And that's why if somebody follows the activities of the Chinese government, they can see that they throw a huge amount of money to Muslim countries, to OIC countries. They invite diplomats, journalists, send them in very nice trips because they are concerned about the outside reaction. At this moment, Xinjiang is in a total lockdown, so people who would like to go and see and investigate what is going on, they cannot. But they are really worried about what the world outside is doing and saying. Nevertheless, if we see in the short term, I think the Chinese are doing pretty well. They are corrupting many people to spread fake stories about what is going on in Xinjiang, and they're throwing a lot of money around the world, and a few countries dare to speak about it. If somebody can see my videos when I was in these detention centers, we had there journalists from Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, many other Muslim countries. When we came out, nobody said or reported something about what we witnessed with a video, what is going on there. Alice, maybe you can give a better explanation.
I think it was a pretty comprehensive explanation. I guess from my own perspective, yeah, I think zeroing back in on the kind of colonial nature of the relationship between the central government in Beijing and this region is really important, right? And that is certainly in what you just said as well. You know, in spite of this region being quote unquote peacefully liberated, which was not peaceful at all, and becoming part of the People's Republic of China in 1949, the central government in Beijing, I think, has never felt that it's had full control and real full integration of this region. Uyghurs have resisted assimilative efforts for decades and decades. And, you know, the geopolitical and economic concerns and so forth are certainly playing into this, but there's just a desire to really fully integrate this region into China, finally, once and for all, solve what the government has long called the problem of this place. And, you know, in the process to quash, right, the distinctive lifeways, the distinctive identity of the people who live here. Like, these are very classic colonial imperial type dynamics between the central government and this region. And I think that undergirds so much of what's happening here. You know, Uyghurs have posed challenges to the legitimacy of Beijing's rule over this land that occupies a sixth of the land mass of China and sits atop, you know, natural resources, oil reserves, minerals, natural gas, on and on, right? So it is complicated with no simple answer, but, you know, unfortunately, people are suffering massively as a result of it.
Alice, if I can add something to what you said, is that the Chinese, they are now practicing a subtler colonialism there. And the massive Han-Chinese settlement and investment is in a way a mean to control and to dominate and to change the demography of the region. In my discussions that I had with our Chinese friends when I was there, they were repeating to me always that they were very much worried about what happened to the region in 1990s when the Soviet Union broke and many Uyghurs could escape and could go to Mecca, Medina, to the Islamic world, to Malaysia. And this was an era of change, you know, because there was a kind of opening. And now they're trying to reverse that. And they're using massive technology to control every inch of the territory, subtler colonialism and money. And they're succeeding, to say the truth. They're succeeding, and they are ruling with fear. People were afraid, and the control was horrible. I mean, I have visited in my life many horrible places in our planet of colonial settlement and others, but this was the worst that I've seen.
Yeah, thank you for that addition. I think, it is heartbreaking, and the conditions there are very sad. I went back in 2018. So I lived there from 2012 to 2016. And as I said, we could definitely feel that things were getting very bad in terms of policy, in terms of treatment, right, of Uyghurs. The surveillance state was just growing massively. And there was so much evidence that this was happening. But we couldn't see what it all meant, right? It was like we weren't far enough away to see what it all meant and how it was all going to play out. And I went back to the region for a visit in 2018. I was able to go and was pretty shocked by what I saw, right? The way that, the policing grid was sort of laid out everywhere, the checkpoints, the cameras, right? Just the surveillance state was so visible. And then there were yet more things that weren't even visible at all, because some of like the worst things that were happening were things that I was never going to be able to see. You know, I wasn't on the kind of trip that you were on, and I wasn't able to see them. But I just wanted to add that as a little bit of perspective as well to what you're saying.
Thank you, Dr. Ilis. But having been engaged in doing research in the region itself, can you tell us and share your perhaps opinion on whether the identity of the Uyghur people, how resistant it is I mean, under all these circumstances, are they hanging on? I mean, are they, very much determined for their survivability? Or how do you see the whole situation? Are they giving up, for example?
I think it's really hard to answer that with good, solid, systematically gathered evidence, right? Just because of the difficulties of doing something like systematic ethnographic research and actually being able to talk to people about that. You know, anecdotally, okay, let me back up and say, I think that the answer to your question, it's a really, really excellent question. And in addition to what I already said about the difficulties of doing research on this, I think it's also likely going to differ from person to person, you know, depending on a lot of things about their own background, but maybe also what generation they are in, right? How tightly are they going to hold to, you know, the things that they see as essential to their identity as Uyghurs? That's going to depend, on a lot of factors, including age, and including educational background and, you know, educational experiences and so forth. But when I visited in 2018, by way of anecdote, I'll just say that I actually ran into some people I knew and had very, very brief conversations, right? Just on the street, with some of my neighbors. I ran into old neighbors or an old security guard that I knew from my school, or, you know, people I knew who worked at restaurants in Urumqi and Kashgar and whatever. And a lot of people would whisper to me, right? You know, some version of like, have you heard what's happening? Do you know what's happening here? Right. And like that to me doesn't answer the question of how tightly they're going to hold to their identity, but like they knew something was wrong, right? They were experiencing these things as traumatic, as an uprooting of their lives. And, you know, they were probably taking great risk at even having a conversation with me in whispers, right? For just a few moments. And they wanted to know that people on the outside knew about what was happening. And they were asking in some cases, you know, is anybody doing anything about this? Because we feel hopeless. I think the situation for Uyghur children is a lot more frightening, because children as young as infants who aren't even a year old are being boarded in state facilities, you know, boarding schools and other institutions where they're never really going to have exposure to their own families, to the native language, right, where they're being raised as wards of the state by people who do not speak their native language and are not their own relatives. And so the kinds of identities that those children are going to grow up with are going to be quite distinct. And I think the fear of many Uyghurs is that they will grow up without Uyghur identity, you know, and it just takes a generation or two for chains of transmission to break, and for trauma to be something that people can very deeply experience.
Dr. Olsi, any addition to that one?
Yes, when I visited Xinjiang, I almost agree with what Alice is saying, that I mean, there is some kind of resistance, but some people are simply losing hope. For example, coming to the issue of kids, this lady here, her name is Huzame Mahmoudi. I interviewed her, and she had a cut on her left hand. And for people who want, they can see this video later on. This is after I released the first videos from the Aksu concentration camp. And if you can see, the Chinese now, they are very aggressive with me. They are even telling me, do you want to save her? Do you want to pay $2 million to save her? Because I mean, we like protested after what we saw, what they were doing to people in Aksu. This lady, she had been separated from her 2-year-old daughter, because I just wanted to add up what Alice is saying, that their children are being taken away and they're being sent into boarding schools, like we had the example in Canada with a big scandal that we have nowadays about what the Catholic Church was doing to the kids of the natives. So the case of Husame is one. And the reason why Husame was sent to the concentration camp is because she wanted to live halal. So she didn't want to take money with interest, with riba from the banks. And for this reason, she was arrested and she was sent to the Kashgar re-education camp. Now, coming back to your question, if there is a resistance or not, yes, there is a resistance, but we were not able to fully investigate it. We had an example, for example, when we were in Urumqi, that there were some Kazakhs who met my Turkish friend and they told him things are horrible, but if you are a Turkic Muslim, you are absolutely not allowed to talk to foreigners. So as soon as these Kazakhs were speaking to my friend from Anadolu agency, the Chinese went immediately to them and they scared them off. There are people in the first video of Sumaya that I showed to you, the guy who was with her, I forgot his name, who when I was reciting to them Quran and I was telling to them, you believe in Allah, I could see hope and resistance in their eyes. Now, because me, myself, I was born and grew up in a Stalinist country in Albania, we know that resistance is always possible against the oppressive regimes. But what will happen in the long durée is that people are going to lose much of their religion, but people who want to resist, they can resist. The only difference between what we went through in the Soviet bloc with what the Uyghurs are going on today in Xinjiang is that they live in a high-tech dictatorship. So during time of the Soviet Union, you could always evade the regime because the regime could not trace you. And when you went to the street, you were behaving yourself. The problem is that the level of surveillance was unimaginable. Uyghurs are placed in certain areas because I've interviewed many Uyghurs. Even after I came out of these camps, they became very famous with the Uyghur community. And they told me that if they live, let us say, if your house is in Gombak and your mother is, let us say, in Santu, you cannot even go and visit your mother. So they're living, it is like we lived during the COVID-19 lockdown, that you had to stay only in your buildings because of the spread of the virus. They had this kind of system before the COVID. And they are being kept in isolation. And something that was very worrying, which Elise mentioned, is the fostering system that they have. Because some of the Chinese who were accompanying us, they were really good guys, they were humans. And when we saw what we saw, and some of them, they really felt with us. And one of them, I don't want to mention who he was and his name, and he told me, said, look, life is not good for us. This guy was coming from some region of China. He was working for the government. He had a good house, living in a condo, good salary. I told him, why? You live in a good condo, you have a good salary. He told me, look, they force us every year to spend 1 month living with Uyghurs, because it is compulsory for every Uyghur family to open their house and to live full-time with a Han Chinese colonist. So if you live with your wife in apartment, you should have a Han Chinese sharing the house with you. And the mission of these people who come from other provinces is to teach you Mandarin, to make sure that you eat pork, that you don't pray. And these people, they were complaining. They were telling to me, look, they send us to villages and we have to sleep on the ground because these people, the Han Chinese who come from other provinces, they come from different culture. So they were forced to go and live with these people. So, I mean, the level of de-Islamization and indoctrination is, I mean, unimaginable. I haven't seen it anywhere in the Soviet bloc. And there was a great urgency from the government. They were really afraid from the Uyghurs, and they're doing the process of de-Islamization in an industrial scale. But I think still the resistance is there, and especially for the peasant communities, and some communities are even nomads, like the Kazakhs, people who live with animals in the mountains. For them, it is difficult for the regime to penetrate, but the biggest problem is in big cities, like in Urumqi, like in Aksu, where the control of the Communist Party is huge.
Thank you, Dr. Alsi. Dr. Elise, from the Western perspective, how can you share with us perhaps the most effective, I mean, something which would be an effective measure on the civil society level for us to carry on and to lobby this discourse of the Uyghurs that we can benefit from you here in Malaysia or anywhere else? Do you have any suggestion that you can share with us, please?
Yeah, it's always the $1 million question, right? Like, oh God, what do you actually do? So yeah, I offered some very humble suggestions. I think too that I feel a little bit worried I'm not going to give an adequate response, to be totally honest. I'll say this, there's a lot of action proposed in the world right now that essentially focuses on punishing perpetrators, right? And causing economic impacts, right? That are going to make maybe the perpetrators change course. And we've seen that have some effect. Sanctions on officials, right? It's not sanctions on just average Chinese citizens that some countries like my own have leveraged. But I wonder if one measure of our good work on this crisis as like humans and citizens of the world is also looking for ways that we can actually support people who the Uyghurs, the Kazakhs, and others who are going through this awful thing right now, right? So I think in particular campaigns like the one that Malaysia for Uyghur is doing and trying to really get off the ground, about providing material support to Uyghurs in Malaysia and providing support to Uyghur refugees, it's a really tangible kind of action that you can go to. Maybe also, I'll revise my answer a little bit to say that my overall answer to this is that I don't know if there's even just, one way that's the best, right? Because this is such a multifaceted problem with so many awful dimensions that really takes a global coalition of people doing a lot of different things in order to address it. And I think, to go back to the example I was just kind of wandering into, that if some action is going to focus on punishing perpetrators, but I think if we can also think of ways to help survivors and provide real, tangible, material assistance to those people, alongside doing even simpler things like raising awareness and volunteering some of our time, with an organization or going before MPs. Those are all good options that allow just us everyday average normal people to take action.
Thank you, Dr. Elise. Dr. Alsi, what is your comment? I mean, the desperation, that you've been living with us here in Malaysia, the way that Malaysians always like to respond to crisis in other countries, for example, we usually would chip in monetary contribution or by any other means possible. But in this situation, the Uyghur, we just, ran out of ideas. I mean, how to help out, actually. So what is actually your take on this one? What is your suggestion? I mean, how can we, as the title of the forum suggests, move forward in this situation?
Well, Malaysia has done great things in the Balkans during wars in Yugoslavia. They supported the Bosnians, they supported the Kosovars, and they were quite successful in those years. The problem with China is that China is not Yugoslavia. China is a superpower. And you cannot do anything against. So you can, but it's very difficult. On the other hand, I think what is poisoning the situation very much is that the Uyghur issue nowadays is being depicted by China and its allies as a Western intervention in its internal affairs. And this is poisoning the situation a lot. Coming from our Islamic university, I think that we should think about having an Islamic response. Because let us say, when a declaration comes for the Uyghur issue coming from London or Washington, the Chinese are going to raise their flags of anti-imperialism, and they will see it as an intervention in their internal affairs, and they will say, this is our internal affairs, so it's none of your business, you cannot lecture to us. But what I've noticed, even from many articles that I've written, and I had feedbacks from Chinese ambassadors responding to me, is that the Chinese, they're very much worried from an Islamic perspective on this issue. Now, listen, the Uyghur issue is probably as old as the Palestinian issue. Palestine was invaded in 1948, East Turkestan 1949. So it is almost the same situation. But Uyghurs, for many reasons, they failed to internationalize their issue, like the Palestinians and the Kashmiris and how others have done. They haven't produced any Islamic leadership like Kashmiris or Palestinians have done. And it is funny that in many parts of the Muslim Ummah, Muslims only now they're discovering it. And on the other hand, when you see the information about Uyghurs coming from the West, many Muslims tend to ignore it because they are very suspicious of the West because of its actions in the Muslim world. So what I think is needed is an Islamic perspective. And probably if Muslim countries from the OIC will take this issue seriously and will talk to China in a non-aggressive way. And because this is what I try to do myself, but I'm an individual, I'm a historian, I cannot change history. I can only observe it. But I think that if Muslim countries take an initiative and tell to China, look, we are not touching you, Xinjiang, that is your region, we recognize the international law and your legality, but at least allow these people to practice their religion. And on the other hand, what I have noticed, especially when I visited Xinjiang, is that the Chinese, they are very materialistic people and atheists, and moreover, they come from non-monotheistic background. It is easier to discuss about religion with a Christian or a Jew than with somebody that comes from a background that doesn't understand our feelings. So when we were in Xinjiang, we were discussing with many officials and we're telling to them, how can you jail people for praying to God? And their answer was, look, we're doing them a favor, we're giving them a free education. So they were perceiving it from a materialistic point of view. So because moreover, they do not have the concept of freedoms that especially we in the West have about human rights, that you cannot touch the freedom of the individual and everything. For in the Chinese society, where they're used for many decades with this party state and which decides on anything, you cannot even talk against the government. So for them was not convincible the demand that we were doing. And on the other hand, we have many Muslim countries who, for economic reasons, they have to be quiet because they need China's money, weapons, technology. I think that if the Islamic world, with the OIC, with countries like Turkey, Malaysia, Indonesia, and others can come up with a round of dialogues with China, maybe the Chinese are going to listen. And if you see the official propaganda that China does and so much money that they spend, they take people from Malaysia, from Albania, from Egypt, from Saudi Arabia to produce nice comments on them. It shows that the Chinese are worried. But in my opinion is that they do not know how to respond. In one way, they have this anger issue with the United States because they have so many conflicts, the Taiwan, the Tibet, and they say now they brought us even the Xinjiang issue. So, I mean, when two superpowers talk it's very difficult to find a solution because they see this as a zero-sum game. But I think if we, the third world, the Islamic world, will come with a solution, maybe we can do something.
I just wanted to jump in and say, yes.
I was just about to ask, yeah, please.
I can't believe I forgot, but yes, absolutely. I really think engaging the OIC, right, in addition to local elected officials, but how, can, and I don't have, the blueprint for how to engage the OIC, but, look at the letter that recently came out, with over 90 organizations, Muslim organizations from across, Asia, right, writing a letter of concern. I think if there can be a groundswell of action like that, right, people, across different organizations, different countries, different parts of the Muslim world, really working together like that to try to influence leadership of the OIC, that is, in my mind, an excellent sort of, path to be walking down in terms of action on the crisis.
Ellis, if I can add something, we recently had this letter from this Global Council of Imams on the Uyghurs. The thing is that the letter was not well received by the Muslim world. We had the muftis from Russia to Bosnia and others who rejected it. The reason was simple. This Global Imam Council was connected with a US embassy in Baghdad and Western organizations, and it simply discredited itself. Not because the letter was not good, the letter was great, but number one, they became too political because they were saying we have to boycott the Olympics. And the second is, I've told to our Uyghur friends since many years that they need to go to the grassroots of the Muslim society. So when I saw the letter was coming from a Shia mullah in Baghdad, I was very happy at first, but then it was not Ayatollah Sistani. So the thing is that the Uyghurs have in a way to reinvent themselves and to explain their issue to Islamic movements in the Muslim world that have really good image, that are not associated with the Americans. I'm sorry, I mean, you are representing the Americans here, but you have a image problem in the Muslim world. So for good or for bad, I don't want to discuss it here. But the question is that there need to be another approach from organizations, from clerics, from people with great authority, because look, after all, the Uyghur issue is an Islamic issue, is a human rights issue, is a human issue after all. I mean, so you cannot treat people like they are being treated. The problem is we are not yet having that kind of leadership in the Muslim world. And even though with the great effort that organizations like yours is doing, which is to be appreciated, the problem is the Muslim world must have its own solution, come with its own proposal, so that even the Chinese will not be suspicious about it. Because this is what I have discovered from the Chinese. They are very stubborn. And sometimes they simply do not understand what they are doing. Thank you.
If I may, Dr. Akmal.
Fahmi, yes. But we are running out of time. You have like 2 minutes. I mean, or injury time, 3 or 4 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Akmal. I would like to just ask both panelists, since we are working not only through advocacy, but at the same time, Global Peace Mission are working tirelessly on the humanitarian basis. Looking from the discussion and point of view that we receive the information from the speakers, from the narrative or document prepared by the so-called Western perspective. But I would say that if we want to focus on the charitable, but of course, I believe that the Uyghur do not need that yet, I mean, much in terms of charitable assistance, but silence can be part to be explained by the logistic difficulties. I mean, if we refer to many reporters, since we consider me and the rest of our team as activists, we can be in Yemen, we can go to Syria, we can go to anywhere. So from there, the footage is there, we can hear the story, we can make our own narrative. So I think it's also difficult for us to access to China, to the Uyghur community. I mean, we cannot go nearby to Urumqi. We cannot go there without the permission from the China. And in fact, if they allow us, that one is we consider as a the visit is already orchestrated. So with no footage of their suffering, million can suffer unnoticed in the dark. So what's your comment on this? Thank you.
So who do you want to answer your?
Maybe both time, because it's quite sensitive was to hear the response.
Okay, Dr. Olsi, you might have something to share with us.
Yeah, Dr. Fahmi, I mean, from what I saw when I was in Xinjiang, number one is the Chinese will never allow foreigners to go there. They are very suspicious of the foreigners. The second is that there is no economic crisis in Xinjiang. People could find jobs. And I mean, from what I saw, I haven't gone to remote areas, but in general, people were not looking bad economically. The region is booming economically, so I think the Uyghurs can find a job and they can survive. The greatest problem that Uyghurs have are those who live in diaspora, from here in Malaysia to those in Turkey and other countries, and maybe and many of them who are practicing Muslim, especially those who are in Turkey, they have great difficulties. Some have no documents, no passports. Chinese government refuses to give them. So probably if we are thinking about humanitarian help, maybe you should think mostly for those who are outside of Xinjiang. Now, another thing that organizations like IIUM and others could do can be in investing in advocacy. For example, having funding and then approaching different organizations in the Muslim world, even governments, and telling to them and convincing them to talk to China. Because I believe that there is always a way for doing dialogue with China. The problem is that we don't have something like that in the Muslim world. We see even the Uyghur Human Rights Project and others, most of them get US government funding. And this is a big problem because the Chinese propaganda, what they say is, oh, look, they are all being paid by CIA. And when when you put the Americans in, then you are done, you're finished. Because nobody wants to see what is your real problem. You know, I was attacked by some people on Twitter like a few weeks ago. They're telling, oh, you are being paid by CIA. I told them, no, I'm not paid. I criticize Americans day and night for what they do in Palestine, in Albania. So I'm the last person in the planet that you can blame me for being a CIA spy. But this is what happens. So, Mr. Fahmi, I think we have to come with an Islamic perspective. And I believe that if we can find a way out and to approach the Chinese and to go to them as friends, to tell them, look, we're not Americans, we're not planning to, support Taiwan for its independence. We're just the Muslim Ummah. So we are not asking you to create the state of East Turkestan. We're just telling to you, can you please allow these people to go to Hajj, to have passports, to have madrasas, to read Quran, and to practice Islam? Simple. Only this. And I think if we can generate enough voices, especially among the intellectuals, maybe the Chinese leadership in Beijing is going to rethink. Because now they are in a confrontation mode, and they see this as an American intervention in their internal affairs. And you know what is the result? They say no, and we're superpower. We don't care for anyone.
2 minutes, Dr. Elise. Can you respond to that?
Oh my gosh, there's so much I want to say, and I don't even know how to organize my thoughts. Putting aside the issue of, you know, the United States. Okay, right. So, on the point about that, like the economic thing, it's not that Uyghurs don't have problems finding jobs, that there's often not choice, right? And these forced labor schemes, which are very well documented in all sorts of documents, right? You know, make it very evident that Uyghurs live profoundly unfree lives, sort of no matter what they do. I just wanted to make that as one point. But getting to the point that Olsi made about providing material support to Uyghurs in diaspora, that is what I was saying, and maybe, or what I was getting at, but maybe didn't say so clearly, right? If we want to think about how to help Uyghurs, they are targets of transnational repression, like I started talking about in my presentation, pretty much everywhere in the world where Uyghurs live. And, you know, that sort of humanitarian support, because this is a humanitarian crisis, and it's a crisis we should all care about as human beings, right? With beating hearts and consciences and so forth. But like, that is one, I think, very meaningful kind of action that we could all pursue. There's so much more I would want to say to this in response, but I'll just cut myself off there.
It begins to get more interesting always at the end of a session. But really, we learn a lot from both of you, Dr. Olsi and Dr. Elise. Perhaps in actuality, we need 2 more hours actually to trash out everything that we need. You know, since we are getting to know one another better, I mean, after 2 hours. And perhaps we can organize another talk or session or discussion on the same issue in the future, in the near future even. So on behalf of the organizer, I would like to thank both our panelists, Dr. Elise. It's evening there, I suppose, in the States. Yeah. And Dr. Olsi with us here in Malaysia, and those of you who are with us on this Zoom platform, and those who are with us in the YouTube channel. Finally, I was asked by the organizer to take photo together. I mean, there'll be someone from the Secretariat to record this, I would say, historical moment. Please, Secretariat, and the rest of us who are here. Done? Okay. All is set. Secretariat, please. Okay, done. Then thank you very much all, and thank you to Brother Riaz again, and precious information, of course. We learn a lot from Dr. Olsi and Dr. Elise. As I mentioned to you just now, we are looking forward for another session, perhaps discussing the whole issue from a different angle. Thank you very much on behalf of the organizer, and Assalamu alaikum, and we see you inshallah in other program in the future. Thank you all.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Thank you so much.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
Assalamualaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.